Welcome back to McFly's subscribers. Today we're tying a crayfish fly that I developed. Yes, this is my own pattern, and is even being distributed in fly shops across America. It is one of my favorite crayfish flies to fish for bass, but it will also catch more than just bass. Now I will discuss this fly and its uses later in the video, as I'm sure you want to get started tying right away, but in case you haven't seen this channel before, this is McFly Angler.
Starts now.
Okay, let's start tying. Place a hook and bead securely in your vise. For a hook today, I'm using Firehole Sticks number 523 in size 8. This is a jig hook, which you will need for this fly, and it's got an extra long shank. Now to save a little money, these Risen 9030s could work, as they are a long shank jig hook. Not quite as long as the Firehole 523s though, but they don't come in sizes larger than 12, and as you can see these Fireholes are much larger, but you can tie these flies smaller if you wish. Risen also sells these O'Shaughnessy jig hooks, I think that's how you pronounce it, which in size 4 could work for this fly, although for my area I find a size 8 is perfect. We also need some tungsten slotted beads. Make sure you use the slotted ones, and these Risen tungsten beads are the best price for quality beads I've ever found. The easiest way to get the bead on the hook is place the bead in your hand and bring the hook point to the bead. You got to make sure though that the bead is oriented the right way, and I'm using the dirty olive color in 4.5mm. Also, it won't seat properly onto the hook if not oriented the right way. We will also need some thread, and today I'm using Viva 6/0 in brown. Now you could use other colors as well, and I've used all these color threads to tie this fly, and I will show you some of these flies in other colors later in the video. Okay, let's start the thread right behind the bead, and snip or snap off the waist. Now this bead will move down the hook if we don't form a thread dam behind it. So let's make multiple wraps of thread right up against the bead to keep the bead in place. Okay, the bead now is not going to move. Then bring your thread down to the bend of the hook. For antenna, I like using crystal flash. Today I'm using gold, but for other color crayfish you could use a different color flash, which come in many colors, more than I have here. Pull out one strand of flash and clip it off the hank. Then fold the flash in half and align the tips. Measure out about 2 hook shank lengths, and then tie it in at that measurement with a couple tight wraps. Then I like to tie down into the bend slightly to make the antenna angle downward, which this fly swims hook point up, so they will actually be angled up when the fly is finished. Okay, cut off the excess flash, but save that piece as you can tie another fly with it. Then let's clean up the tag ends with a couple wraps. Now we need some dubbing, and today I'm using this Antron dubbing in the ginger variant color, but use whatever color you want. You could also use flashy dubbing like this UV2 Diamond Bright, which come in many great accent colors. Whatever dubbing you're using though, pull out a small pinch. You don't need much. Dub this onto your thread, creating a tight and thin dubbing noodle. Then start wrapping this onto the hook right at the start of the antenna, creating a small dubbing ball like so. End with your thread a wrap or two back from the dubbing ball. Now for the legs. I'm using silly legs today in barred orange. And these come in many different colors, way more than I have here. You could also use round rubber legs, like these centipede legs as well, but pull one leg off the hank. Fold it in half and then align the tips. Cut them even if you need. And then measure out about a hook shank length. And then tie these in with 2 wraps. Now split the legs on either side of the dubbing ball and then tie them down to the dubbing, which will help splay them outward like so. Now we can cut off the waist, but save these so you can tie another fly with them. Okay, let's clean up the tag ends with some wraps, and end with your thread about at the hook point. Now we need some Chickabou, and later we will need some soft hackle, and these Brahma soft hackle with Chickabou pelts from Whiting have both, which is super convenient. And I'm using the tan color today. Let's pull off 2 Chickabou feathers, align the tips, and then pull off the fibers towards the base of the feather. I find it easier to tie in when I wet the feathers like so. These feathers have a slight curve to them, so make sure you tie them in so the curve splays outward. We want these to extend out about as long as the silly legs. Tie them in on the side of the hook. I also like to make sure that they are angled down slightly. And tie up to the rubber legs, where both the legs and dubbing bump will help to splay them out even further. Okay, let's tie the next feather in on the other side, ensuring the tips are at the same length as the previous feather. Now you might have to play with them a bit to make sure the legs are on the inside of the feathers. Now you can trim off the stems and then clean them up with a few wraps, and bring the thread down to just shy of the bead. Now we need some material to make a back. I like using the Swiss straw. However, in the past I've used thin skin, which comes in many different colors, like this mottled one. This pheno skin is similar to the thin skin and can work, but you have to cut all these to the right thickness. Scudback is another material that you could use as well, which is pre-cut and comes in many colors. However, scudback is stretchy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but all these could work, and maybe other materials as well. But I've been using Swiss straw and I like it a lot. A piece this size will tie maybe 3 to 4 of these flies. Okay, with the fly turned hook point up, tie this in so it's directly on top. And then we want to spread this out slightly and push it back like so. Then bring our thread down to the claws, tying this in as we go. We want to check this to make sure there's no gap and you can see just the start of the dubbing ball. Then turn the fly back around and bring your thread up a wrap or 2. Now we need the soft hackle part of this pelt. Pull off 2 hackles about the same size. By the way, these pelts come in many different colors, more than I have here, but these are the colors I tie them in regularly. You could also use soft hackle saddles like this from Whiting, which could work for the body. However, you need some Chickabou though as well. Luckily, Whiting sells Chickabou pelts like this. You could also use mini marabou from other brands as well. Just make sure it's the small size marabou. Anyway, whatever soft hackle you use, you want to pull off the fuzzies at the base of each feather. Then grasp the tips of the feathers and stroke down the fibers, leaving you with a small tie-in tag like this. Now these feathers have a curve to them, and you want to tie these in with that curve going towards the hook, right at the tie-in tag. Bring your thread down to about the halfway point on the hook. Then grab some of these plunger style hackle pliers to grab the stem of the hackle, and then start wrapping the feather up the hook shank with open wraps until you reach the halfway point on the hook. Capture the stem, and if you tie down tight and then double the feather stem over and tie that down, you can just rip the stem right off, or cut it if you want. Okay, let's grab the other feather and do the same thing. However, the tie-in tag might be a little bit too long now, so let's cut some of it off. Tie the feather in and do the same thing, wrapping up the hook shank. When you reach the bead, capture the feather and trim or snap off the waist. Clean up the collar with some wraps. Then we need to brush out the fibers to get them to stand up and release any trapped fibers. Then I take a bodkin and separate the fibers in the center on the side of the hook point, and then flatten out those fibers with my thumb before pulling the Swiss straw over the fiber. You might need to pull back some of the fibers and adjust. Then I usually poke the straw through the hook eye, and then make a wrap or 2 over the material. And you can then pull on the backing to tighten it and make a few more wraps to lock it down tight. Now pull the Swiss straw back and tie over again before clipping off the waist. Grab a pinch more of the dubbing, and this time I'm using brown, and make a dubbing noodle onto your thread. Then wrap this noodle around the collar to cover the thread wraps, and end with your thread right behind the bead. And then whip finish the fly. To cement the head, I really like this Solarez Ultra Thin resin. It has a handy paintbrush in the cap for easy application. You want to just put the brush in the cavity of the bead, which will brush the resin onto the whip finish. And this way you don't get the dubbing ball soaked with the resin. Then cure it with your UV light and the fly is now finished. Now you could fish it like this, however, I find it sits better on the bottom if the fibers are flattened out slightly. So let's start teasing the fibers out sideways until they are sitting more flat, like this. Then to keep them there, I like running a bead of that Solarez resin down the spine. When you cure it, those fibers will stay splayed outward like this. So there we go, the finished McCraw fly. This fly is such a fish attractor, and I'm not just saying that because I developed the fly. Everyone I know who has fished it has said the same thing. Fish love to eat this. Here is some footage of me fishing a river near me, and I was only able to get out for a half hour or so. I caught quite a few bass, and even hooked a catfish on the fly. Ugh, I hate touching those slimy things. And caught a few of these little Rio cichlids, a native fish to the South Texas rivers. But I've also caught trout, sunfish, and carp as well with this fly, and bass in multiple bodies of water and multiple states. Here's a nice bass I caught in Utah with it. The reason for its fishing effectiveness is due to a few things. The hot spot here gets the fish's attention, and the soft hackle on marabou moves really nice in the water. These marabou claws stay splayed outward in a crayfish defensive stance, and when you cast it out, it sinks quickly to the bottom due to the tungsten bead, and it will almost always land the correct way because of the jig hook. which offsets the line connection, causing it to ride hook point up. It rarely lands upside down like this when it's on the bottom. You can give the line a little twitch and it will raise up the front end, like a crayfish trying to defend itself. When it sinks, it lands with the bead end down, and then due to the marabou claws, which trap air bubbles in them, it will lower the front end very slowly. Since these have a tungsten bead, they work great to get down quickly, even in fast-moving water. You can bounce the bottom of deep holes and fast-moving riffles, or fish really deep water in lakes. But they still work really well for shallow areas and won't get hung up on rocks or debris as often, since it swims hook point up. Now, I tied the brown color today, which is a pretty common color for mimicking crayfish, but you can tie these in other colors as well. This brown and olive color scheme works really well. Here's a bright orange and black one that I fish stained water with. Purple and black is also a very common bass color scheme for stained water or low light conditions as well. So get creative and tie these in whatever colors you want. Alright, well I'm 2 flies into this bass series now, and halfway to filling up this bass fly box. Last week I tied up the Clouser minnow for you all, a very effective and versatile pattern. That works for just about any fish that like eating small bait fish, and bass are no exceptions. Now next week I will be tying a bass popper for you all, which if you've ever fished bass with topwater, you know that there is nothing more fun than watching bass blow up on a topwater fly. So make sure you're subscribed and click the bell notification so you don't miss any future videos like this bass popper. Oh, and by the way, I will soon be selling these fly boxes on Amazon with free shipping. They're made entirely of foam, which means they float in case you drop it in the water. They're also not too thick, so they don't take up much room in your pack, yet they can still hold some decent sized streamers without compressing the materials, and on both sides as well. The clasp is magnetic, and the magnets are very strong, and I've had these automatically close almost every time I've ever dropped them, which means you're less likely to lose flies due to clumsiness. Now they're not available yet for sale, as it takes a while to get these up on Amazon, but I will link to my Amazon storefront so you can check out my other fly boxes. And keep checking back, because these foam boxes will be available soon. Also, don't forget to check out my sponsor Risen Fly. They made the beads I use today, but they also make some of the best fly rods and reels for the money I have ever used. Best off, they're offering you all a discount. So if you're in the market for a new rod or a bunch of hooks or beads, go to www.risenfly.com and type in McFly at checkout, and they'll give you 15% off of your first order with them. Okay, well thanks for watching everyone. If you like this video, please do me a favor and click the like button. Also, please help me out and share all my videos with your fishing friends. I will see you on the next video. Now you go catch some fish.